Zu links, zu utopisch, zu Klima. Zu kaufen, die Wochentaz. Die neue linke Wochenzeitung. Immer samstags neu am Kiosk.
And welcome to the Taz Lab warm-up episode number 8. Today's talk will focus on the extreme right and their networks in the digital space. We will talk about filter bubbles and incels, as well as the Russian-Ukrainian war, and maybe also the question, does the internet make us more fascist? Before I introduce my guest this evening, I would like to say a few things beforehand. My name is Aron Teuscher. I'm an editor at Taz Lab. As you probably have noticed, I'm speaking English right now instead of German. Our talk today will take place only in English and will not be translated. I apologize for this. Ich werde es ganz kurz nochmal auf Deutsch wiederholen. Ihr habt bestimmt gemerkt, dass ich nicht auf Deutsch rede, die letzten 1-2 Minuten, und dieser Talk wird heute auf Englisch stattfinden. Wir werden ihn nicht übersetzen können. Ich bitte um Entschuldigung dafür. If you have any questions, please comment below at the stream on YouTube, or you can also write an email to taztalk@taz.de. Thanks very much at this point to Marlene Mosig, who's doing the commentary moderation this evening. And lastly, I want to say that our online formats are free of charge, but not free of costs. If you would like to support Taz, you can do that via Tazahlich. All right, so now to my guest this evening. Katarina Ristić is a researcher at the Global and European Studies Institute at the University of Leipzig. She studied philosophy at the Belgrade University and did her PhD in Leipzig 2013. Her first book was about the war crime trials and memory in former Yugoslavia, which focused victims' narratives and trials and media portrayals. And in the past, she has also researched at the Bundeswehr University in Hamburg, as well as the Magdeburg University. Her current research is mainly focused on right-wing extremism and memory culture in the digital age. Welcome, Katarina. Thank you that you're here today with me.
Thanks, Aron. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right. So today we want to talk about new and transnational network of fascist ideology in digital age. But before we come to the digital age part, I want to talk about the contemporary right wing of fascist movement. So my first question would be, is there something we could call a new right wing / fascist movement?
There is a big debate, scholarly debate on this question, and there are two, I would say, main positions. One mainly proposed by political scientists is saying that we are facing with something which is new and which shouldn't be confused with classical fascism of interwar period. That there are so many differences which one shouldn't neglect, and hence we need to talk about rather new political phenomena. On the other hand, there are many historians, and I include myself in this group, who see many continuities which are important to understand what is far right today and how it functions. So we can really see both trends, one which is identifying differences, and among these differences, for example, one can say that we do not see a strong leader, for example. There is no one leader which is presenting the nation, speaking in the voice of the nation. Rather, we see something else. We see grassroots movements, bottom-up mobilization, completely different way of organization, right? On the other hand, we see similarities in a general kind of paranoid pattern of the world, as many scholars have defined fascism, in the way it is constantly creating not only crisis, but this sense of threat, of existential threat, toward which the only defense is actually fascism and the violence it usually promotes. So
yeah, that's definitely continuous. I think like the the new part or the changing part you mentioned, how would you say it's different from, for example, post-45 fascist movements? There are things like leaderless movements. We have seen in Germany in the 50s, 60s, as well as in America. But could you say that there is a change during the last, I don't know, 50, 60 years that's even more groundbreaking? Is there a continuity there as well, or?
Well, I think that one of the main changes is a new master frame, which is proposed, and we see move from what was biological racism into a cultural racism. And this cultural racism seems to be more acceptable, and it's more normalized within a general kind of public. It is more acceptable, and it seems that people, especially when it is translated into what they call ethnopluralism. So actually what fascists are fighting for today is preservation of different ethnic groups. That is why we don't want any kind of interconnections, any kind of interracial mixing, and so on. So this is kind of the argument. So this change of the master frame managed to a large extent to normalize the main argument of the far right today. So this is, for example, one such change. Second change is definitely digital media. Digital media and social media in particular has created a very beneficial terrain, so to say, for far right mobilization. And there are several aspects of it, from anonymous participation, from platforms which are using this kind of, or rather not moderating and not limiting hate speech, invitations for violence, and so on. They are the spreading of conspiracy theories and theories of great replacement and white genocide, which are now in the center of far-right mobilization, are also possible in this extent only because of digital media. They are almost non-existent in traditional media. This is important to say. That means that the whole kind of mobilization actually goes through digital media, which is, of course, contributing to this large success of the movement.
Yeah. Yeah, we will talk about digital media a lot, I think, today. Let me get back to one point you mentioned before. You said that these ethno-pluralistic thinking or ideology, which maybe has similarities, but is not the same as the biological racism we have in earlier forms of fascism. Can this ethno-pluralistic thinking be somehow connected also to new kinds of conflicts we have since the 1990s? I think about the former Yugoslavia, of course, but also about Rwanda and similar wars or conflicts which happen at the line between different kinds of ethnic identical structures or national structures.
Well, I would say that there is a change. What we've seen in former Yugoslavia was really this politicization of ethnic identity as a main kind of identity marker, which was going together with religion. So it was religion and ethnicity, importantly, of course, because the language, the history, the culture were so similar and almost undistinguishable. But taking the constructivist perspective, one always has to have to stress that this was really elitist, top-down creation of a new sense of ethno-nationalist identity. And within the far right, what we see today is, of course, this ethno-pluralism, but there is a much more stress on civilization, on whiteness, on race. So they are combined. And this stress is changing within white supremacy claims and civilizational threats. So it is becoming not only pan-European in the sense of its own transnationality, but it's literally becoming the Western white civilizational project, which is defending from other races and other ethnic groups. Another big change is that Slavs were not really welcomed during the original fascism, and now they are somehow incorporated. Of course, this is very kind of questionable and problematic, and especially now with the war in Ukraine, we see that there is it's not easy to define who is in, who is out anymore, and which far-right groups are actually contributing and in which way. And this is a very messy process, if you want, which is ongoing, and they are still working on with the material which is produced in politics and in conflicts in order to create some kind of consistent picture and narrative about what is happening.
Would you say in the war in Ukraine and Russia, there's a consistent fascist ideology, or not really consistent, but is there something you could name or call a fascist ideology which is used, propagandistic, for example?
I wouldn't, but there have been accusations on both sides that Russia is proclaimed for using fascism or turning into this combination of socialist nationalism, which is directly leading toward the fascist policies. And this kind of expansionist war is something which some scholars would interpret as a classical fascism. On the other hand, Russia is accusing Ukrainians for actually ethno-nationalist Ukrainian anti-Russian policy. So we see that fascism in this case, I think, is used more as a label, as a negative denominator of to simply delegitimize the enemy rather than to understand what is really happening. When I talk about digital fascism, I'm really talking about extremist groups, which are usually not part of political parties and political programs. And even when we talk about political or populist radical right regimes, they are still not, I think, reaching the threshold of fascist regimes per se. So there is still difference. And many scholars would really agree and were very skeptical when Trump was, for example, accused of being fascist, neo-fascist, and going into that direction. This changed to some extent after the 6th January and attack on Capitol. This was the moment when many skeptical scholars said, well, in the final line, what happens is that this kind of populist radical right politics actually goes against institutions and goes against democracy. And this is then the moment when you see that authoritarians are then turning into this kind of threat for the state and for institutions. But I wouldn't declare that easily fascist regimes around. I don't think that is helping our understanding of what is happening.
What would you say is the difference between far-right, fascist, right-wing? I know it's a debated question. It's not so easy to answer, but like maybe you have a definition for yourself.
Yeah, well, I do have it for myself. There is it's a huge debate again, how to define them and what is exactly how to make these borders. I would say with Cas Mode that with radical right and populism, we have this classical kind of combination of nativism, which is this ethno-nationalism, authoritarianism, anti-elitism. So this is kind of populist thread of radical right. Nationalists are usually very unhappy when someone says that fascism is just another degree of nationalism. And I think rightly so, because fascism is doing something else. It is really proclaiming what Griffin calls this rebirth of the nation, and it is revolutionary ultranationalism. It is very different from the nationalism which might be constitutive for the state, for the democracy, for the institutions, and for the rule of law, something fascism is not. What we do not know now is to what extent this populist radical right, even if authoritarian, is actually a threat to democracy. And there, for example, Jan Werner Müller would say it is always a threat. There is no such thing as not threatening popular radical right movement, because in the end they will turn into a threat for democracy and institutions. But this is something that we still need to see. We see battlefields all over the world, from Israel to Hungary to Serbia and so on, and we don't know how this will play out.
Yeah, and maybe you could explain again what, like, you mentioned the word rebirth and national rebirth. That's a myth, or that's some kind of how would you describe it?
Well, there was a attempt, I would say, for decades to identify what is this fascist minimum. What are the minimum conditions for a state or movement to fulfill in order to be called fascist, right? And we have so many definitions and so many criterions. And this debate somehow ended with Griffin's definition of palingenetic nationalism or ultranationalism, or this idea of rebirth. And it is important because it is something that we find in all appearances and in all alternatives of different fascist movements. We always find this myth, this core myth, that the nation, the group, the community can be saved from decay. And it is always, the starting point is always this dissolution, decay threat, existential threat. The only way to save it is to create some kind of national rebirth. And this is the promise. This promise looks always in the past. It is taking from the past, from the tradition, from the history of the group. It is taking this ideal of how to, what is to be taken or to be appropriated as a solution. And then through this rebirth, the nation should be saved. And within the rebirth, we have also this promise of violence, because it is often revolutionary kind of force.
It's interesting, like a revolutionary force which tries to preserve something, like revolutionary conservatism. I know that's the whole thing, but it's interesting because it's so counterintuitive.
It is, and we still are kind of debating whether this is a modernist, conservative, progressive, or counter-progressive movement. So all kind of cards are on the table when talking about.
What would you say is the connection really between, like, the movement, the real movement of far-right people as we see them on 6th January, the siege of the in USA, or other real life happenings, to the digital sphere or space in general? What is the relationship between that?
Well, I mean, I cannot speak about individual cases because some trials are still ongoing, and we still need to see what will they bring out. We do see some organizations, so it's not really as it looked at the very beginning, as if it was completely digital online movement. So this idea of Julia Ebner from several years ago is now a little bit put under the question, but there is no question that we are talking about people who are mainly radicalized online. So it seems that those digital platforms are the main community building spheres, and that they are serving for organization, for mobilization, for radicalization. So this is where the majority of the work is happening. And you can see from the symbols that they are using, like taking the flag of Pakistan. Those of you who know Pepe the Frog and the whole symbolism around Pepe know how the Pakistan developed into a symbol of alt-right. And we've seen these flags in the attack on Capitol, signifying that we are really talking about really close connections and identification of these people from the digital sphere, and how they understand their activism there into real life and into political activism. Similar
on that point, the Pepe the Frog, maybe a side note, that's a meme. Maybe some of you have seen it. It looks like a harmless frog, and it's been used as a far-right fascist symbol until since, I don't know, 2015 maybe or something. And Kyrgyzstan is connected to this meme, I would say.
Yes, exactly. And Angela Nagel, in her book Kill All Normies, where she analyzed exactly this Pepe the Frog and the broader alt-right movement in America, she really made a point that this meme wars, which was in digital sphere, in 2016, as Trump actually appropriated or happily took over Pepe and posted himself on Twitter as Pepe the Frog, that for Nagel, this is the moment where actually digital media and those fringe networks from digital space took over traditional media and in the end managed to get into a White House. For her, this was the end of traditional media and control over media in political process the way we know it. Whether that is true or not is another question, but there was a huge kind of change in how political process was seen from this moment.
So the media is changing in that aspect somehow. What is the alternative? What are the digital platforms that we speak about? Is it just Facebook, or is it just like a filter bubble? I have to imagine like a few people talking on Twitch.
Well, it's more complicated than that, I would say. First, traditional media didn't go anywhere, and traditional media is still very important for many different processes, not only communication and information. What is new is that we have a whole set of new kinds of media. And here I would first introduce alternative media, for example. So this is media which operates in a very similar manner as traditional media. It is just financed by other sources. Usually we don't know who financed them. They are spreading conspiracy theories. They are challenging any kind of scientific knowledge. They are challenging political institutions. They are challenging the state, but they are doing that very consistently and within one ideological framework. Auf eins in German is, for example, one example of this kind of alternative media. In addition, there is a whole set of social media, very by now established as a mainstream social media. And there I'm thinking about YouTube, for example. YouTube allows for many individuals to stream their own ideas and to create big communities which are listening to different interpretations they have about the world. The same is true with Facebook, with Twitter, with I don't know, even Telegram, although it functions in a little bit another way, or Discord. But this is still within commonly shared, I would say, sphere where many different views are presented. One can stay in the bubble, but one also can always get into what is happening in other kinds and among other kinds of worldviews. And the final and completely different way of communication and way of mobilization is happening on image boards like 4chan, like 8chan. So there we see a complete lack of any kind of moderation, complete lack of any kind of regulations. So hate speech is absolutely allowed, any kind of commenting, insulting, spread of any kind of lies, not only disinformation, but pure lies. Many new forms of, as they call it, bullshitting and trolling, new ways of communication were developed in this kind of closed environments where I would say regular users do not really go that often. It is really a small group of, I would say, young, male, gaming, techno-prone generation, which is gathering around these platforms on very
classical incel movement, maybe.
Well, incel movement is one of those. There are many groups. They are overlapping, and it's not really clear how to define the members, but they are overlapping and they are coming together within this kind of platforms. So it's a complex media sphere, and it's all there at the same time, and people need to navigate between those different kinds of media and how they use them.
Maybe on the last part you mentioned, like this image board. Can you explain what exactly they are and how they originated, what the origin of them is?
Yeah, image boards started. I won't go into a history, but let me say just a very few sentences about image boards, because they are very different from what we know as a regular social media, because they are literally created to allow any kind of posting where you can put an image and a comment or video or links or anything, and each user can start own thread, giving the topic at the very beginning. For example, usually they start with, hello Anans, what do we think about? And then they give the topic for this day, and everyone else can answer. They are completely anonymous. There is no registration, there is no login, there is no email, there is nothing. And they simply follow this thread. They can post if they want. If they don't, they simply go to another thread or post another thread. What is interesting is that among many hundreds of, or tens at least, of different topics, and this range from anime to popular culture and news, there is a specific poll, politically incorrect part of the 4chan board, where topics which are politically incorrect are discussed. And there we find most of these far-right kind of ideologies and topics.
What is this? What are these people that are on this platform? Like, how can you describe them? Is it mostly? I think like many people are from USA, maybe, or from like. Can you make out the nationality of them and who exactly they are?
That's very difficult. Because, as I said, you don't really have any kind of information which you can check. So there is a flag, but this flag is also can be changed. So it's not necessarily right. When you see a US flag, for example, it doesn't really mean that someone is from US. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. As I'm doing the research now on 4chan, one can say that there is a very strong American, I would say, part of 4chan. You can say, I mean, I'm saying that because of the topics. So they are really dealing with daily political topics in US. And then I would say that this is more sign of those who are within American culture and politics than what kind of flag they have on their account. There is a lot of Anons, as they call them, from Australia, New Zealand. This is another hub. Germany is always there, of course. Europe in all kinds. And as I'm looking now at Orthodox Christianity and Eastern Europe and how Orthodoxy is used, I find a lot of users from Eastern Europe, Balkans included, which are then sending or posting many links to their own political situations. So that is, for me, this is the only sign from which I conclude that someone might be from the place that they are saying they are. If they say, okay, look at the protests in Georgia, where Orthodox Church organized anti-LGBT protests, and then they post a link leading to a local newspaper in local language where you can only kind of see a picture but understand what is happening, and then translating that into English, I interpret that as a way of including Georgian or Eastern European kind of political culture within a broader transnational far-right movement.
But how does it work? I mean, like most of the people that communicate on these boards are somewhat nationalist or definitely patriotic, maybe even fascist, and still they share different information about different national identities, about different national symbolism. Doesn't it also lead to conflict inside of that filter bubble, that like different kinds of countries or different kind of people from different countries get mean to each other? Or I don't know, how does it really work? Is it just internationality on top of fascism?
Well, I don't think it's right to consider this kind of far right as non-transnational. I think they are deeply transnational, and they are working within a very transnational sphere. They are collecting the ideas, they are supporting each other with symbols, with political slogans, with political tactics, with strategies, and they are borrowing from each other. In that sense, they are connecting for a very particular reason, and that is to strengthen their fight, of course. And there is not necessarily clear division or clear disconnect between what they want. As I said, within this broader white supremacist agenda, they are actually defending Western civilization or white civilization, a white race. And in this broader kind of topic, they actually fit very nicely together, and they see themselves as being part of one joint struggle, not fighting against each other. Their main enemies are Muslims, and Islamophobia is one of the major points around which they organize. This doesn't mean that anti-Semitism is gone. Of course, it's not, and it's very present, but it seems to be secondary to what is perceived as a threat from Islamism, as they see it, which they define as fundamentalism, which is going to destroy completely Western traditional values, which they define as patriarchy, family, traditional family, order, security, father in house, male being dominant as male should be, as they would say. So there is a very clear kind of value and ideological setting within which they define what they are fighting for.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's if we talk about like anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, to connect this to digital filter bubbles like 4chan, where stuff like shit posting and memes are very viral and often used, which is also very counterintuitive, or it doesn't really fit together, like a joking atmosphere and everybody's like making fun of about others with memes and so on, and disconnected to really, really horrifying and hurtful content. How is this like happening at the same time?
Well, one can definitely say that this is a very free and completely unsafe zone of communication. And I think that those who are part of it are quite used to this kind of radical humor, of very dark humor, and of insulting each other throughout. That is how they communicate. They communicate through swearing, through violating each other, and so on. On the other hand, we have seen that visual communication and humor has really turned into a main forces of mobilization. So it's not really writing long texts or reading books about fascism, although they do that too, but mainly it is sharing jokes, sharing memes, sharing gifts, often with a very particular half humorous, half dark messages, which are then spreading. One such example, which I was following in my research, was remove kebab meme, which appeared, at least in traditional media, after the attack in New Zealand, when the terrorist Tarrant Tarrant, before before starting the attack in the car, he played some music from Yugoslav wars, which I've never heard in my life. And after that, in his own manifesto, he called himself kebab remover. On his gun, he also written, I'm kebab, remove kebab or something like that. So I started to follow, and of course, traditional media right away starting to develop this story to understand what is this about. And that is how we realized that there is actually a meme, remove kebab meme, which was created from this song that he was playing. The song itself is just a insignificant nationalist song from the wars in former Yugoslavia, where then leader of Serbs in Bosnia, Karadžić, was praised and invited to lead the Serbs into fight against Muslims and Croats and Ustašas, as the song says. But it was changed in digital media. The song was translated or transformed into a picture of one of the musicians, over which a slogan, remove kebab, was written. And now the meaning of the meme moved into invitation for annihilation and the killing of Muslims. And then you see that this meme, and it was one of among top 10 memes in 2015-16 in some quantitative researches which were done on memes. So it wasn't some small, marginal, not important meme. It wasn't as big as Pepe the Frog, but it was quite influential and quite shared around the social media. And then you see that this unimportant song and this war, which has nothing to do with anything that is happening in New Zealand, is actually getting into being really appropriated within a direct kind of violence by a terrorist who is using that to signal his own position and his own anti-Islamism or Islamophobia and hatred, which is then finding the way in the most terrible terrorist attack.
Digital fascism or digital right-wing ideologies and real-life fascism are definitely connected in this instance, or we can see the connection in that.
Yeah.
How would you say do these filter bubbles like 4chan, where these memes are mainly shared, influence the real world, like radicalized people and so on?
It is hard to say. On one hand, we have instances of violence like the one that I just mentioned, or Kyrgyzstan flags on Capitol Hill. But on the other hand, I did interviews with many students, and what they say is that they know about these memes, that they know what they mean, but that they also have enough of their own digital literacy and ideological standpoint not to fall for those jokes, right? So since it is always a humor, there is always a double message. One message is simply a humorous message, but it is also serving to downplay usually a radical or violent message behind. And students with whom I talked within my research were very strongly claiming that this kind of memes can never have any kind of effects on them because they know. So they've really focused on digital literacy. They didn't express it like that. This is now my interpretation, but I think that is it. That's it. That if you know what is happening, and if you are not part of a far-right group, there is, of course, no chance that one meme will turn you into one. I mean, of course, this is kind of obvious. What is more problematic is when people are joining this kind of groups without knowledge, without clear kind of stand, being very young, for example, and looking for community within which they can form their identity. And I think this is where actually the problematic process of identification might start.
There's one scholar, Timothy Snyder, which you probably know, who is also researching right extremism and among other things. And he has asked the question in a YouTube video he made, does the internet make you fascist? I found the question really, really weird. When I heard it the first time, I thought like, no, I don't think that the medium like internet as such makes me a fascist, but maybe what he means is if the medium internet has certain formats or certain things to itself that enable fascism in a more global sense, or in a more easy way to radicalize people. Would you agree with that? How would you answer this question?
Oh, well, I'm big fan of individual agency, and I wouldn't fall into any kind of deterministic, technologies turning us into anything.
I hoped you not, but you still know what I mean.
Turning us into anything. Humanity is as there as it always was. What I think that Snyder, from my reading of his book, Road to Unfreedom, what I think that he is actually pointing at is that internet is not the way we see it as this regular average people talking, grassroots movements, down-up mobility, and so on. What he is actually stressing is that much of this communication is very much manipulated from particular political centers. And he is especially concerned about the Russian troll farm factories and the way that Russia has influenced in his understanding, for example, elections in US. And I think that one part of this is naivety, that he is trying to challenge naivety if approaching social media as if these are regular people as us. A big part of authority of social media is this sense that this is just regular people talking. But once the research is done and when we see what is happening, what we see actually is that there are so many structural actors from nation states, from different security agencies, from advertisement agencies, from companies, and so on and so forth, which are actually playing as if they would be just a regular kind of users, but using this legitimacy and authority of regular users to spread their message. And many of those messages would be completely differently understood and taken by users if they would know who is standing behind them, right? So there is this kind of play that not knowing with whom you are talking on in social media is a big part of the problem, I would say. Second, I think important point here to make is that this kind of strategic disinformation and purposely kind of spreading lies and false information is not really something new. I mean, it is not that before that we didn't have this kind of neither propaganda nor misinformation nor lies by the government or by other kind of big powerful actors. So in this sense, I wouldn't say that digital media is completely changing the way we perceive this kind of public communication and mass communication. We just need to learn new rules, but this is same for everyone. Companies are also learning new rules, and politicians are also learning new rules. So in that sense, we are all kind of catching up with what does it mean to work now or to be now socialized within social media.
Mm-hmm. We are all no prophets, but maybe we will experience similar things with ChatGPT and other AI technology in the next couple of years. I don't know if you have thought about fascist movements and networks while reading about ChatGPT or using it in the last couple of months. Just came to my mind. What do you think? Is this some perspective new tool of fascist movements and anonymous users?
Me, ChatGPT was more challenging in the sense of my work at the university, because for us,
I believe that.
Our students are going to use them, it, how we are going to help students use it in the right way, or rather critically assess what ChatGPT is doing. I did try, of course. I asked several questions, some of the fascist questions included, and usually the answer is, this is not a topic, I cannot talk about it, this is something that I can do. I'm not sure how helpful that is, and whether this is really, in long term, any kind of end of this kind of game. So I cannot really say. But I do think that it will definitely change the way we think and work. And this is, again, a big kind of change and shift that we need to carefully think and to reflect on how and what exactly we are going to do with it.
2 points on that. The first thing is I've read an article 2 weeks ago where someone jailbreaked ChatGPT. So it was possible to get unfiltered answers by the AI, and the answers were somewhat disturbing. And also, I think one question was, would you, ChatGPT, have made a better job than Donald Trump as a president? It was very interesting, and the AI actually answered and said, yeah, definitely, I would have made a better job. That's the one thing. So that can be broken, and also disinformation and well, I don't know, fake news could also maybe spread about this. Just a thought of mine. And the other thing is, we've seen the graphic AI develop so radically fast in the last couple of months. Those fake images of Trump getting arrested. I don't know if you saw that, or the Pope in his white cool I don't know, jacket or something. This is also something people have talked about, which could be used as fake news or could make problems to identify what is real and what not. What do you think about that?
Well, it is very difficult, and the content that we are getting is becoming more and more populated with content of sources that we don't know and that we cannot identify. And the only kind of resource we actually have to defend is always to put under question whatever we are seeing, and unless seeing the source, the author, the when and how and why and for whom was this created, and all those critical questions that we tend to ask about any source. Really, it's not now about ChatGPT or AI. That is the rule for any kind of source. Because only then can we understand what is really happening. And I think that we are coming very rapidly to the point where people are massively aware of this, that there is this representation, and that there is the distance between what they perceive and as reality and whatever is served in any kind of media. And I think this is a process of learning that we are undergoing. And I'm not pessimistic at all about our ability to adjust and to simply put under question everything that we see in media. It's not that actually away from the way that we deal with this kind of portrayed or presented information in previous times.
Okay. Let me get back to something we talked about earlier. You've mentioned Christchurch, and in connection to the mimetic, the meme, remove kebab. What is interesting about this is, besides the mimetic commemoration, is also that the attack in Christchurch, but also in Halle, were live streamed in a way that almost looks like a game. I haven't watched the videos, but that's probably the best comparison, like a shooting game or something. And they were not only live streamed, but also commented live on certain platforms, maybe 4chan or something. How would you describe what happens there? I mean, like, when people talk about xenophobic or anti-Semitic content, and maybe feel like they are disconnected to reality somehow. It's not like I can understand, but it makes it more easy probably to speak hate or to insult people. But if those Anons actually see people getting killed or hurt, this border between the real life and the digital doesn't really exist, or does it?
It's very complicated, and I think that there are several aspects that one needs to distinguish from each other. So one is what the shooter is trying to do. And we see clearly that there is this idea of video gaming and translating everything into a game, into an Unreal, into a virtual, and then connecting it within it. It's almost like a claim that there is no difference between digital and real world. They are melting together all the time, and we are all living both at the same time. So this is what they call post-digital today. So in that sense, for the terrorists, it seems very clear what is their attention. As for the followers, this, as I mentioned before, the communication in 4chan is very often violent. They push each other into suicide, for example. So this is quite often, this is how they talk, especially with incels. And this kind of people who are kind of troubling, they have nothing to live for, and so on, then you will find this kind of answers. So this is a way of communication which is developed within these platforms. And as I said, without any kind of moderation, without any way to limit that, one cannot really do anything about it. What kind of psychological profiling this then needs, I wouldn't really go into that, but we are observing a very disturbing phenomenon, definitely.
Okay, maybe a last question. What do you think is the future of this development? Or what can we say about prospective new developments coming in the next couple of years about digital fascism and also the interconnectivity and the transnationality of these movements?
Well, there is a whole set of regulations which are started from national and supranational levels, and many organizations and communities are trying to limit and regulate somehow this communication in digital sphere. So this is definitely one path which is going to be followed. We have UN working on that, we have national governments working on that, and so on. Depending on how you understand fascism for leftist scholars, it is actually transnational capitalism which is producing this kind of fascist ideology as a backlash in order to sustain development of capitalism, while scapegoating only those who are really in no power, and that's why immigrants, that's why women, that's why LGBT, and so on. So for those scholars, if you don't, as this Horkheimer says, if you don't want to talk about capitalism, you don't talk about fascism. I think that they would be more prone to say that this is something to stay and that we will see this kind of development further. It was funny to observe when Elon Musk bought Twitter, how this plays with this leftist thesis of connection between capitalism and fascism, all under the free speech right dictum. On the other hand, those who are more on the liberal side and who are seeing power of institutions and democracy to kind of fight back and to obtain or retain the rule of law, they might be more prone to see some kind of regulations and some kind of finding a way to regulate and to limit at least hate speech and violence the way they are perpetrated now in this kind of media. I don't think the phenomena itself is there to disappear. I think it will have new forms. Probably it might be changing. Fascism as an ideology is adapting tremendously well, I would say, to new circumstances. And we will just have to wait and to see into what kind of development is waiting for us in the future.
Well, Katarina, thank you very, very much for the interesting talk. thank you also to the viewers and the digital sphere. And yeah, have a nice evening and goodbye.